What's the real motive when governments have out-of-control immigration? When the Gillard and Rudd governments were letting the boats in, some said the reason was simple: boats for votes. And why did the Biden administration, with the border czar, Kamala Harris, let in well over 10 million across the southern border? According to Rasmussen, one of the few real pollsters in the United States, 55% of likely voters in the coming election believe that it's likely that a large number of non-citizens, people who've come in illegally, are also illegally registered to vote. And 32% of those think it's very likely. Ohio announced this month that it had removed hundreds of non-citizens from the rolls as the state begins to conduct an audit of registered voters. According to Rasmussen, a reliable pollster, 78% of American voters support audits and the removing of all non-citizens from the rolls. 56% of those are strongly supportive of that. Now, remember last week when we were talking about the American elections, almost 2/3 of Americans fear that this election will be rigged. 2/3. And yet when this is raised, we're told, oh, Trump is lying about this. Trump's lying. Well, it seems that almost 2/3 of Americans agree with that, and so do I. When you look back at the 2020 elections and you look at the case that was brought by Texas, you'll see that a lot of it was very much rigged. Anyway, in the latest Rasmussen nationwide poll taken on the 8th of August, Trump is coming out at 49% and Harris at 44%. An average of recent polls tells us something different. Not that Trump is leading, but if you average the recent leading polls, as Real Clear Politics does, you'll find that Harris leads Trump by 0.9%. Who do you believe? Well, from my experience, Rasmussen is one of the very good polls, which you can rely on, but some of the others are really operating as propaganda arms of the Democratic Party. Now, Real Clear Politics, which just takes all the current polls, they find that on averaging the recent polls in the key battleground states. Now, let me just explain the key battleground states. They're like marginal electorates in Australia. These are the ones that are going to change. Some states are expected to continue to be, as they often are, or usually are, either Republican or Democrat. That's the battleground states, which will change in the Electoral College. And this shows, and this is averaging across the polls, the good ones and the bad ones. Trump is leading 6 to 2 battleground states. 6 states are going to Trump, 2 to Harris. Now, of course, every commentator is prejudiced, but every good commentator tries to overcome his or her prejudices where it'd be wrong to go along with it. I have a number of prejudices. Firstly, I believe that Trump is the only hope for the United States and the West. If he is not elected and the same administration effectively continues, America is going to go downhill, and the West will go downhill with America. That's what I fear. My second prejudice is I believe electoral fraud occurs whenever it's possible. If it's possible, it'll happen. Let me make an analogy with inner Sydney, where I am at the moment. If you make theft possible, you have theft. In this part of Sydney, it wasn't the case when I was a young man, but things have changed. In this part of Sydney, as in most of inner Sydney, where their houses are still on the ground floor, including the old terrace houses, if you don't put bars on your windows, and as I say, there was a time you didn't, you'll have your house broken into. That's a very clear proposition here. That's why if you walk round inner Sydney, you'll find nearly every house has bars on the windows. I don't have bars on my windows because I'm on the 6th floor. And until the thieving drones start coming in the windows, I probably won't have drones, but that may well happen in the future. Now, fraud was made possible in Australia in the 80s. It was made possible by the Labor Party. You used to have to go and vote in your subdivision. That was the area, small part of the electorate, where you were probably known. You don't do that anymore. I can now vote in about 40 different places. Why was that made easier? It was obviously made easy to increase the possibility of fraud. My third prejudice is I believe that the 2020 US election was rigged, as do a large number of people in the United States, because almost 2/3 fear that the next election will be rigged. Now, if you want to read about this, just read about the case brought by Texas about the election. If you go through the case brought by Texas, you'll see that there's a very good case that this was rigged legally, but the Supreme Court, and I think the judges were a bit frightened. They had good reason to be frightened of Schumer, the Democrat leader of the Senate, who stood on the steps of the Supreme Court of the United States and threatened the judges. In Australia, he'd be put in jail. But in the United States, nothing happened to him. I think the judges were personally threatened. Anyway, the judges decided that for a legal technicality, that is standing, which means you don't have an interest in the case, a legal interest in the case, they decided that Texas, supported by about 18 states, couldn't bring its case in the Supreme Court. My fourth prejudice is that I believe some media outlets and some pollsters have decided to put aside their ethical duty, and they've decided to become the propaganda arm of the Democrats. So those are my prejudices. I tried to not apply them whenever it is inappropriate, but I'm being open, I think, in telling you what I think.